Hi again guys, and welcome to the first of 5 bonus episodes that we're doing in return to a relatively recently ended series for SuperSports cars, the vehicles which, by my definition at least, run between sports car and full-on supercar. Now this particular pick is discussing the first of a couple of GTRs which we're going to have in this series, and first up we have this particular model, which is the 2001 concept version, the Tokyo Motor Show GTR. This was of course the first R35 generation, or what would go on to become the R35 generation GTR, that was featured on Gran Turismo. Way back, I believe on Gran Turismo 4 was the earliest that we had this car. So that being said, and given the fact that this is one of the most expensive GTRs in the game at $1 million credits, especially as far as more street level GTRs go, is it really worth that price? And considering how few people you see using this car, is it actually that much better, if better at all, than any other R35? Because the R35 has a very strong selection of road cars as well as race cars. You've got the original 2007, which is very cheap and very fast. You've got the Spec V, which is lighter and more track focused. You've got the Black Edition, which is probably the best all round in terms of value. You've got the Nismo, which of course is a monster in a straight line, and various others. This one though costs a lot more than all of those. It's almost 10 times more expensive than something like the Black Edition, the Spec V, the Nismo, etc. So is it worth 10 times more? Well, consider what you get. As far as the engine, we're not actually told what the capacity is, though we can assume you're looking at around 3.5, 3.8 or so litres, similar to the road-going version. It is of course turbocharged, it's all-wheel drive, and in its fully tuned form, although this car does, at 951 horsepower, have less power than most, if not all, of the other R35s, which generally have over 1,000, especially in road-going form, 951 horsepower is still potentially more than enough to get the job done. You're also looking at a pretty massive 822 foot-pounds of torque, which is actually more than some of the other GTRs. That's more than the GTR prototype, for instance, and more than the GTR with the black mask variation. That's pretty impressive given that it has less power. As far as weight, this car is also one of the best GTRs in the game at 1,253 kilos, which is a lot lighter than some of the others. The horsepower per tonne is really greatly helped by that at 759, and the PP is also reasonably high, but definitely reasonable at 652. That is justified for this car. The fact remains though, $1 million credits for a non-premium concept version. Is it worth that? Especially when you can get the prototype version for 430,000, and even the black mask, which is closer to the production version, for even less, at $250,000. Well, for me personally, the answer is yes, but not because it's a better car. This is more of a different car than it is a better car. When you compare this vehicle to other Nissan GTRs, it's really nothing like them. Technically speaking it is, but it's really not. It could be its own unique vehicle, not even necessarily a Nissan. Visually, for instance, it's completely different to any of the other GTRs, and personally, I prefer the look of this vehicle to all of the other GTRs. It looks like much more of a pure supercar design. Now, as far as concepts go, they tend to be expensive, and they tend to not be allowed to be painted or tuned visually. Now, this one cannot be tuned visually, but it can be painted, and that's a really nice feature, because many of them can't. As far as price though, it does live up to that trope of concept cars. It does cost a lot. So, for $1 million credits, what kind of performance can you expect? Because there are still quite a few people who have not bought this car. Well, in a straight line, you've got 7 speeds to work with, which is unique among R35s, and although, no, it's nowhere near as quick as the others, the top speed is around 270-ish under its own power, so significantly less, but it's also a much, much older vehicle. Don't forget, this is a 2001 vehicle. That is a lot older than all of the other versions, and even though the spec may seem similar, the advances in tech that occurred in the roughly 6 years between this car's appearance and the actual production GTR change a lot. The tech changes an awful lot in that time. So yes, it is slower, but understandably so. The acceleration, due to the fact that it can be tuned to a very high power level and of course have NOS, mean that off the line it's still a monster, and the straight line performance overall is very, very good on this car. Even though the top speed on its own is slower, the draft potential is still very high. You can easily get this car over 300 miles per hour even without using NOS, and overall I quite regularly use this as a top speed racer. Not because it's the best, it's actually the worst technically as far as GTRs go, but it's just fun, and it has the potential to compete. Even though it's not better than any of them, it is good enough to run with them. What about around the track though? Because of course straight line speed isn't everything. Well, I'm very happy to say that around the track, the lack of competitive edge that this car has in a straight line is more than made up for. Because around the track, this is one of the best GTRs. Now, being a concept version, you'd forgive it for not being as good, because as we said before, the tech is older, and at the end of the day, although yes, it's technically a working vehicle, it's really just a show car. It's not designed to break lap records, so the fact that on the game it's as good as it is impressive. Around the track, the drop in weight in particular is very noticeable. The car is much more nimble than something like a Spec V, certainly more nimble than, say, the Nismo. In fact, around most twisty circuits, this car can wipe the floor with almost all of the other GTRs of the R35 shape, with the exception of maybe the Black Edition, possibly the Spec V, and that's about it. Overall, this is a brilliant track car and a very underappreciated one, and overall, I consider this vehicle to be better than the racing version. The racing version is popular, it can have NOS, which is unusual, and it's very powerful, but it ain't that quick, and it ain't that good. This car is much more usable and underestimated. But that's it overall for this particular pick. I'll see you guys next time, and as always, thanks for watching.